Hello everybody, I'm Rowan6 with Rowan6 Entertainment, and welcome to a new series, a audiobook series of my fanfiction, The Dragon Hero Dovahkiin. The background art for this fanfiction is created by me. If you're interested in me doing art commissions for you, the link to my business Discord is down below. There's also a link to my community Discord, as well as the fanfiction link. Thank you, and enjoy the video.
UA, Nizu's office 5 minutes after the meeting. Nizu watched Izuku and his party leave UA's campus. He knew that the boy was telling the truth thanks to the detective's quirk. Knowing the quirk society they lived in, he knew anything was theoretically possible. But if the boy's skills in analysis were anything to go by, he could not eliminate the possibility that he found a way around the man's quirk. That's why he was quite glad when Nemuri offered to tutor them. To be honest, he was planning on offering his own services, but this will allow him to keep a discreet eye on them and further validate their story. Who knows, they might get in trouble and he could see what other skills they had. For now, though, he will need to learn more about this magic and how it's utilized. Maybe he could play on a couple of the boy's heartstrings and pay back a debt he owed to one of his deceased friends at the same time. An idea formed in his head, and then Nizu's smile had quickly turned into a manic one. Yes, this idea will do. Outside of UA. When the meeting concluded, Izuku's group left UA. Nizu agreed to sort out the paperwork for his companions, even buying a single gold brick from him so they could make a down payment on a bigger apartment. He also agreed to find buyers for all the treasure he had. However, due to how late it was, he did not have the time to showcase his abilities. So instead, they decided that the UA entrance exam would be a proper showing of their capabilities. Which brought up another problem, the written exam. Serena and Lydia don't have any formal education, and if it weren't for Midnight's offer to tutor them, he did not know what he would do. Although he was quite surprised that Nizu was quite okay with her doing so. He half expected that he would have made that offer, to keep an eye on him. Perhaps this was an attempt to do exactly that. No. He knew that she had her reasons to do it, and he knew that Nizu was just as surprised as he was. But that did not mean he would not take advantage of this in some way. Oh well, it's nothing that he can't handle. Walking out of UA and into the city, Izuku looked at his companions, and he could see that they had a starry-eye expression on their faces as they took in the sights. They have been here for a little over a week, but unfortunately had to stay indoors. He knew that they didn't like being stuck indoors, but he wanted to keep a low profile until he got in contact with UA first. He knew his friends and their penchant for danger, not including the danger magnet that he was. He knew if he let them outside they would stir up some type of trouble. If somehow they got arrested and were caught without the proper paperwork, they would be in a lot of trouble. But because of that, they were unable to explore much and see the sights that they wanted to do since day one. Seeing them now, admiring the tall concrete buildings, it reminded him of when he first visited the city of Whiterun. Even though it could not compare to the cities of his home, it still did not remove the wonder and the excitement of seeing an actual medieval settlement. He has explained to the two before that his world did not have magic, but instead had technology that surpassed the Dwemer by leaps and bounds, and the existence of quirks. Lydia believed him, but Serena was skeptical. But now seeing the wonders around them, well, he guessed the old adage, seeing is believing, fits the situation perfectly. I still can't believe how big the city is. Are you sure that this world does not have magic? Because this stuff seems pretty magical to me. Serena said as they passed an electronic store with phones on display. I guess that saying does not fit everyone. Izuku thought. Yes, I'm sure, there's nothing magical about them. Izuku said, exasperated. You expect me to believe that none of this runs on magic? That would mean all this surpasses the Dwemer creations, which is hard for me to believe. Serena said with clear confusion and frustration in her voice. Letting out a long sigh, he gathered himself and tried to figure out how to explain it to her in a way that she could understand. He then remembered an old quote that might help this situation. Well, there's this old saying in this world, that significantly advanced technology can be indistinguishable from magic. Izuku said. Okay, then why has none of Nirn developed anything like this? Serena said as she sighed in defeat. Well, on my planet, we had a similar period to yours, and much like your world, technological development is stunted due to superstition and dogma. For example, remember when I made that big telescope at the College of Winterhold because I noticed a celestial body with one of the smaller telescopes there? Everybody there was afraid that my eyes would have burnt out of my skull and I would have fallen into madness, because my mind and eyes were never meant to gaze upon such a thing. I knew that wouldn't happen because we have such devices in our world much more powerful than the one I built. Seriously, it was not like I was going to stare at the sun with it. So yeah, I give it a couple of centuries before the Industrial Revolution would kick off. Izuku said, hoping that he got his point across. But it seemed that she was still having trouble with the idea. I get your point, I really do. But it's still hard for me to believe. Serena said, still trying to get her head around the idea. Maybe we can stop by a library and she can read up on it. Lydia said as she pitched her idea. Fine with me, there's one right down the street anyway. Izuku said with a shrug. Serena perked up at that. She was a big bookworm, she could stay in the College of Winterhold's library for hours just reading. Hell, she even read all of Izuku's school books that he came to Skyrim with. Lydia, that's a great idea, let's go. Serena said as she dragged Izuku and Lydia along. A day later. Nemuri Kayama, also known as the pro hero Midnight, was finally heading to the first study session she set up with a literal badass dragon slayer and his party. She was glad that she was able to beat Nizu to the punch in tutoring them. Although she was confused that he allowed it, knowing him, he probably wanted to do it himself. Oh well, whatever his reasons were, didn't really matter to her. Especially since she had the opportunity to learn about a totally different dimension and its history. She cannot wait to drag out all the stories and history from those three. But her thoughts on the matter were interrupted, as she approached the spot where they agreed to meet up. But she is absolutely confused. Takabo Municipal Beach Park used to be a beautiful beach, but now is nothing but a massive junkyard. Why were they meeting at a junkyard of all places? Maybe they thought this place was not supposed to be one, it was a public beach after all. As she got closer, she started picking out the sounds of battle, an intense one if she would have to say. Pulling a whip out of her carry bag, since she was not in her hero outfit. Nemuri snuck onto the beach, as she weaved herself around the large pillars of garbage, she got to a large clearing. And what she saw shocked her. It was a dance of blades. Izuku and Lydia were having a very intense spar. If it wasn't for the obvious signs of the blades being blunted, she would have stopped the fight on the grounds of how intense it was. Izuku was using a one-handed katana and Lydia was using what appeared to be a Nordic steel sword. If it weren't for her many years of experience as a hero, she would have thought this fight was choreographed. No, she knew this fight was between two masters of the blade. However, something was off in how they fought. It was subtle, but every time they struck or blocked at the last second of their attack or in the middle of it, they would adjust for something. It was like their fighting style was meant for somebody with a bigger body and longer limbs. Recognition flashed in Nemuri's eyes at the thought. They did say that somehow they were put into their younger bodies. In that case, it would make sense. This only made it more impressive in Nemuri's eyes. But before she could delve further into her thoughts, she felt an arm sling over her shoulders. If it's not Miss Midnight brandishing her signature weapon. What, is the R-rated heroine planning on teaching my Izuku a lesson or two for being naughty? Serena said in a suggestive and flirty tone into her ear. This caused Nemuri to blush heavily. Normally a statement like that wouldn't cause such a reaction. But the fact that she was whispering into her ear in that alluring tone of hers, that promised nothing but pleasure if she submitted to it. That tone of hers gave her goosebumps all down her back. Stuttering like a schoolgirl who was caught peeping, Nemuri tries to give a response to the girl that was hanging off her. Seeing this only made Serena laugh. Then, getting off the poor woman, she decides to lean on an old fridge that had seen better days. I'm surprised that the R-rated heroine could be so easily flustered. But then again, I do have over 1,000 years of experience getting men and women alike into my bed. Although it was more of an attempt to get their blood than sex. Serena said with a flirty and mischievous smile on her face. Still blushing, Nemuri attempts to get herself under control. But as she attempts to get herself under control, Serena pulls out a glass bottle with a paper bag over it and drinks out of it. This caused Nemuri to get control of herself immediately. Aren't you a little young to be drinking? Nemuri says, chastising the young vampiric girl. What? Serena said, confused. Could she smell it when I was close to her? No, the bottle is enchanted to prevent such things. And I do not see the signs of disgust in her eyes, just disappointment. Maybe this is a cultural thing. Izuku did warn her and Lydia that such things may concur, maybe ... Her thoughts were interrupted by the older woman speaking up. Look, I know that you are way older than me. But you're physically younger than me, so you shouldn't be drinking alcohol. So why don't you hand it ... Nemuri said as she attempted to grab the bottle but was cut off by Serena's laughter. You thought I was drinking alcohol. Serena said between her laughter. Pulling back the bag, she reveals the contents of the bottle, which looked to be a thick red liquid. It was obvious to Nemuri that it was blood, and pretty fresh at that. Getting control over her laughter, she takes another swig from her bottle. She was quite happy about the lack of reaction from Nemuri to her drinking blood. Besides the look of embarrassment on her face, there were no signs of disgust, anger, or hatred that she normally got when somebody found out she was a vampire. Izuku was right, people here are more likely to be more accepting of her. After an apology from Nemuri, they sat together on the sand and started to watch the spar between Izuku and Lydia, which continued until Lydia did a successful leg sweep, knocking Izuku onto his back, ending the spar. As Nemuri and Serena walk over to the two, Nemuri starts to praise the two on how well they did and how amazing the fight looked. Yeah, it was a good spar and workout. But we're still having trouble with our bodies being younger than we're used to. Lydia said, a little frustrated. Yeah, I could see that, but I can tell you're already making huge progress on it if what I saw was anything. Now are you going to tell me why you told me to meet up at a beach full of junk for the study session? Nemuri said, a little annoyed by the smell that is coming off from the piles of trash around them. Well, for one, we need a training area so we wouldn't be disturbed. And two, we plan on cleaning the beach for stamina and strength training. All three of us are still pretty fit, but we lost a lot of muscle mass and some of our stamina. Not to mention some of my and Serena's magical power has been reduced by half. So before you got here, we cleaned up a small area of the beach to spar in. And after that, since we had more time, we decided to spar for a bit until you got here. We are actually planning on having our study session at a little cafe I know of that is down the street. Izuku said sheepishly, and after that, the group headed to the cafe to start their study session. Cafe. The cafe was quite a nice place. It was small but cozy. The place had a lot of charm to it, and if Izuku remembers right, their pastries were something special. He remembered coming in here before he landed in Skyrim. It was one of the only spots where he felt safe, and the people there did not care about his quirk status. The owner even kicked out Bakugo after he tried using his quirk on him. The old man who ran the cafe was one of the most kindest people he ever met. The old man's quirk is called perfect hearing. It allowed him to hear anything within a 30-meter radius with perfect clarity and comprehension. This made him one of the few men who could actually keep up and understand his ramblings when he was working on his notebooks. Walking up towards the counter where the pastries were on display, he rang the bell that sat on the counter, twice before pausing, then hitting it 3 more times. This was a signal that the old man created for him after he saw him being chased by Bakugo. It either meant that he needed to talk to the old man or needed a place to lay low for a while, and as he expected, the old man was quick to respond. Walking towards the counter, a warm grandfatherly smile graces the old man's face. The old man was tall and lanky. His hair was long and completely gray, and his hair was tied into a single ponytail that reached the middle of his back. He has a long mustache adorning his equally long nose, and his chin is squared with a goatee that is slightly longer than normal. His blue eyes lacked any pupils but had a hint of concern in them. Izuku, seeing this, could tell why. He used to be a short and scrawny boy without a hint of muscle or confidence, and now he had a muscular physique and a confident air around him. He knew that something like that does not change overnight, so he could understand his worries and suspicions. "Hi Bennett, I can tell you have some questions, but do you think I can get my usual spot in the back before you ask anything?" Izuku asked. Causing Bennett to raise an eyebrow, but did what Izuku asked nonetheless. Bringing them behind the counter, he led them into the back to a private booth. As they sat, the man looked at Izuku expectantly, which Izuku quickly noticed. Letting out a long sigh, Izuku explained what happened to him and who his friends were. However, he only explained that he was sent to another dimension where quirks did not exist, leaving out that he knew magic and that he was a Dragonborn. Although he had to explain to him about Serena being a vampire hybrid. Surprisingly to the group, besides Izuku, the man took it in stride and believed it instantly. Izuku knew why he believed them so quickly. It had to do with his quirk. Because he could hear everything with perfect clarity and comprehension within a 30-feet radius, he could easily tell somebody was lying from their heartbeat alone. Although Izuku knew that the man was skilled enough with his quirk to know that he was leaving a lot of details out of his story. But he knew the man well enough to know that he wasn't one to pry, as long as you did not attempt to lie to him. However, when he asked about Nemuri, Izuku told her upfront, not to lie to him and that he was good at keeping secrets. Nemuri hesitated only for a second before introducing herself. She even went as far as telling her that she was the pro hero Midnight and that she worked at UA, which caused him to nod and give her a bright smile. After introductions, Bennett asks for their order, which Izuku orders for Serena and Lydia. Izuku ordered a whole pie of chocolate cheesecake for Lydia. Knowing her appetite, he knew she was probably going to ask for another, but wanted to pace her. Plus he knew chocolate was on her list of foods to eat. After that, he ordered a number 4 dietary special for Serena, which caused Serena and Lydia to quirk an eyebrow. Before he could explain, Bennett cut in. At my fine establishment, we cater to individuals with certain dietary needs. Since you were from a different dimension, you probably did not know this, but a lot of quirked individuals have certain dietary needs to stay functional. What young Izuku just ordered was one of the dietary specials that involves blood as one of its main ingredients. The special today would be a dark cherry blood pie with raspberry cream on top. It comes with a beverage of raspberry tea, which I could also add blood to if you so desire. However, if I do, I would have to ask, what blood type do you prefer? Bennett said, smiling. This completely baffled Serena. Izuku did tell her people would accept her way more here than in Skyrim. She was just not used to people treating her normally, especially after learning about her vampiric status. In the past, she couldn't even imagine a place like this existing, and now she's sitting in such a place. So you could understand why she was so shocked. The pie and tea will be fine. No need to put any blood in the tea, Serena said, smiling a bit at the old and kind man. Bennett simply gave her a grandfatherly smile and walked off after getting Izuku's and Nemuri's orders. Nemuri took this time to pull out the study material that Lydia and Serena needed to learn. The two started working on some of the material that Nemuri brought with her. Izuku started to work on his homework from his newly enrolled online class. He knew immediately once he got back that he was never going back to Aldera. So during the week that he was waiting to meet with Nizu, he took that time to transfer to an online school. It was one of the best decisions he ever made. Even though he was a little rusty on certain topics, he was able to catch up quickly and make top marks in nearly every class. But before they could get any further into their studies, screaming and the sound of a single gunshot rang through the small cafe. Within seconds the group were on their feet and were prepared for anything. Serena was the first to act. As her eyes turned from blue to blood red, she activated one of her vampiric abilities called Life Sense. She was able to see the life forces of others even through solid objects such as walls. She can even tell between a friend and a foe, and she can see a slight outline of the person's body. So within seconds, she was able to locate every living person within the small cafe, determine how many attackers were there, and the attackers' possible armaments. Without hesitation, she started to relay all the information that she was able to glean to their group. 4 hostages, 1 female child, 1 male child, 1 adult female, and the old man. There are also 4 attackers, 2 female and 2 male. One of the females is armed with some contraption similar to a crossbow, I think you called it a gun. One of the males, who I think is the leader, is armed with a similar device that he can wield with only one hand. The rest are armed with blade weaponry, Serena said as she relayed the information she saw. Nemuri swore, then pulled out her phone, then immediately grimaced. Shit, they're also jamming all communications within the shop, probably some type of jamming quirk. Nemuri said with a grimace, but then an idea popped into her head. All thanks to the report she read on the 3 dragon slayers in front of her. Hey, I remember reading one of Nizu's reports about you guys. You gave him some type of scroll to contact him, do you have something similar on you now? Nemuri asked with a bit of hope in her voice. Izuku nodded his head at her, before speaking up. Yeah, I can cast the sending spell to contact him. Although I think we should arm ourselves just in case help doesn't arrive in time. Grab what you guys need, I'll contact Nizu. Izuku says as he summons a chest full of weapons and equipment, that he prepared for a scenario like this. Then he cast the sending spell to contact Nizu, while the rest of the group armed themselves. Lydia grabbed one of her favorite bows. It was an ebony compound bow, that Izuku made for her for one of her birthdays. Thanks to Izuku's knowledge from this world and the unique properties of ebony, he was able to create a war bow that had a draw weight of 180 pounds, with it only feeling like she was drawing 60. It was also more compact than any bow she ever owned. Grabbing a quiver of Daedric arrows, she grabbed an ebony sword, shield, and a satchel full of standard combat potions and got into a ready position by the doorway that led to their private booth. Grabbing a similar satchel to Lydia's, Serena quickly grabs an enchanted ebony knife, as well as a set of throwing knives, that were poisoned with a strong paralytic poison. Then grabbing an extra satchel full of health potions and support potions, she hands it straight to Nemuri. The satchels are full of potions, the red potions are for healing, yellows are for strength, greens are for stamina, and light red are for poisons or diseases. There's also a first aid kit in there as well. Serena said as she handed the satchel over to Nemuri. Which Nemuri took with a nod. Then, grabbing another combat satchel, she wordlessly handed it over to Izuku, who was still talking to Nizu. She also grabbed Izuku an ebony katana that was named Pacifist's Child. It was one of Izuku's recent creations. It was enchanted with an enchantment that Izuku and her created. The enchantment was called Spectre's Blade. Instead of the blade leaving wounds, it does damage to the person's vitality and mana pool, allowing for non-lethal takedowns. She knew that Lydia's blade had it as well, since the chest Izuku summoned was specially prepared with non-lethal takedowns in mind. As Serena closes the chest that previously contained their weaponry, Izuku finishes up with the conversation that he was having with Nizu. Okay everybody, here's the plan. Nizu permits us to engage, but only if we are in immediate danger or any civilians. We are tasked with scouting and reporting. Eraserhead and Snipe are en route and the police are discreetly creating a perimeter around the cafe. Izuku said in a serious tone, but before Izuku could continue any further, Serena spoke up. We got a patrol incoming, it's one of the men. He's got a dagger in his left hand. Serena says, cutting off Izuku. Then with a single gesture, from Izuku, the party quickly gets into position around the doorway. So it was no surprise when the man stepped into the room, he was swiftly taken out. Not wasting any time, Lydia tied him up with some rope from her satchel. As Lydia was finishing tying the goon up, Izuku was already leading the group out the door. Thanks to the skills he learned from the Thieves Guild, he was able to get behind the counter where the registry and the pastries were on display without being spotted. Looking over the counter, he was able to see what was happening, and what he heard and what he saw disgusted him. Apparently, the goons were part of a group called the Mutant Rejection Clan. which are now being investigated by the Musudafu police. So they decided to send a message by killing the small family that was in front of them, which belonged to the lead detective's partner. What's even worse, since they recently just discovered that the family had cat mutations, and because of that they planned on taking their time killing them. Right now they were preparing one of the booths with some type of metal manipulation quirk so they could tie them down and cut them up piece by piece, starting with one of the children. It also looked like they were taking their time to do so as well, which made Izuku think that they had some type of quirk that made it look like nothing was happening inside the cafe. Looking around, he was able to spot the person pretty easily since she hadn't moved and her eyes were glowing. She also was carrying what looked to be a frequency jammer on her back. This explains why Nemuri's phone wasn't getting any signal. He also quickly noticed right next to the girl with the frequency jammer was the other woman with the rifle. It looked to be a semi-automatic hunting rifle. Seeing that their makeshift torture device was nearly complete, he signaled the group to get in position to engage. Seeing this, Nemuri's eyes widened. She's been on enough stealth ops to know what Izuku was planning to do. Sneaking up to him, she hissed out quietly. "What are you planning, dash?" She was cut off by Izuku covering her mouth. With the universal gesture that meant be quiet, he silenced her protests, and then he quickly cast the spell sending, so they could talk telepathically. "First I am talking to you telepathically, so don't talk out loud." "So now what was so important that you would risk blowing our cover?" Izuku said sternly through their telepathic link, and with the authority of a seasoned commander. Hearing the tone of voice from Izuku made Nemuri gulp. But she quickly got a hold of herself and spoke her mind. "What do you think you're doing? I can tell you're getting into position to attack," Nemuri said through the telepathic link, which made Izuku's eyes narrow at her. Izuku did not need this right now. He could not afford somebody second-guessing his decisions in this scenario. "Midnight, I do not need you second-guessing me right now. They're getting ready to chop up one of those kids like a piece of meat at the deli. And before you think that you could handle this yourself, think again. Your quirk does not have the same effect on females that it does on men. Now how many shots do you think that woman will get off before she goes down? Add to the fact that she's on the other side of the room out of range of your whip. Now this is an order. When we engage, your job is to secure the hostages and get them out of the line of fire before re-engaging. Do I make myself clear?" Izuku said through the link with a tone that demanded obedience. But before Nemuri could respond, a scream from a woman, a terrified cry from a little girl, and a recognizable click from a handgun being cocked could be heard. Before she could react, Izuku was already on the move. With his hand outstretched, he used a spell called telekinesis, which he used on the handgun to redirect the man's aim towards the ceiling so it did not hit the woman and her children, who were his intended target. Izuku idly noted as he was talking to Nemuri that the boy apparently bit the guy who tried to grab him, which prompted him to pull his weapon on the poor family. And as the gun went off and the bullet hit the ceiling, Izuku's foot had already firmly landed on the gunman's face. Before the guy could even hit the ground, Izuku already disarmed him and secured his firearm. This prompted everybody else to move, and Lydia was the first to do so. Popping out of cover, Lydia drew back her arrow and then released it straight at the woman's rifle. The Daedric arrow easily sliced through it, entirely destroying the trigger mechanism and disabling the rifle. Before the woman even realized her gun was disabled, Lydia was over the counter brandishing her shield and drawing her blade. Lydia was glad that she took that time to study up on how firearms operated when they visited the library after the second meeting with Nizu. When she recognized the model of the firearm in the woman's hand, she knew exactly where to aim. Normally an arrow wouldn't be able to puncture the metal plating that protected the inner workings of a rifle. But this is why she grabbed the Daedric arrows. She knew the Daedric arrows could easily puncture through steel and iron plate armor like they were made of tissue paper, so she figured that it would easily do the same here, and she was right. Now her main weapon was taken out of the picture. Lydia knew that she could easily take her. But she was wrong, because once she made eye contact with the girl she was instantly paralyzed. Lydia cursed in her head at her own stupidity. This must have been her quirk. Seeing the girl who destroyed her gun, trapped in her quirk, made her smile viciously, pulling out a knife she prepared to stab Lydia. But was cut off guard when she was hit in the arm by a throwing knife, which paralyzed her from the neck down, freeing Lydia from the woman's quirk. Quickly catching herself after being released from the quirk, Lydia reminded herself to get Serena something nice after this. After that quick thought, she immediately moved on to the woman with the signal jammer strapped to her back. Unfortunately, Lydia immediately had to jump back and use her shield to block the bullets from the two handguns that she pulled from her waist. Lucky for her, the ebony shield held up to the gunfire with ease. Turning into a swarm of bats, Serena appeared behind the woman, before stabbing her in the back of her leg, forcing her to stop firing at Lydia. As the woman turned to shoot Serena, Lydia was already upon her, stabbing her enchanted ebony blade into the back of the woman and out through her chest. Normally such an attack would be lethal, but thanks to the enchantment the lethal attack was instead an instant knockout. Turning around, both Serena and Lydia could see Nemuri's shocked and terrified expression. As Izuku was finished tying up the guy he knocked out, he looked up and noticed the expression on Nemuri's face. Following her eyes, he quickly noticed what she was looking at and winced. He knew what she was probably thinking. After all, Lydia just stabbed that woman through her chest. He knew he had to defuse the situation before Nemuri went over the edge. Speaking through the mental link, Izuku attempted to defuse the situation. Nemuri, don't freak out, the woman's not dead, that blade is enchanted, it cannot deal any lethal wounds no matter how hard you try, Izuku said calmly but sternly. Looking at Izuku, she ignored the mental link and responded verbally. What do you mean she's not dead? She's got a literal sword through her chest, how can she not be dead? She practically yelled. If you don't believe me, go check for yourself. Lydia, remove the blade, Izuku said tiredly. As Lydia removed the blade, not a single drop of blood was shed. The blade didn't have a drop on it either. Encouraged by this, Nemuri walked over to the knocked-out woman and checked her pulse. She then sighed in relief when she felt a strong pulse. God, don't scare me like that. I honestly thought you killed the woman, Nemuri said. But before Izuku could respond, the front door to the cafe was slammed open as Eraserhead jumped through with his capture scarf ready. This caused everybody to go back into a battle stance that only lasted for a second after they realized who the man was. Once Izuku had realized the situation was handled and saw the three so-called dragon slayers standing over three passed-out villains, he could not help the words that slipped out of his mouth. Goddamn problem children.
Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!